The village jewel. The small coastal village of Mere Point wasn't known for much beyond its fishing trade and the sweet-scented meadows that flourished along its cliffs. What it lacked in prominence, it made up for in tight-knit community bonds and traditions that stretched back generations. Among these traditions, the annual Harvest Festival stood as the most anticipated event of the year, a time when the village transformed into a tapestry of color and celebration. At the heart of Mere Point lived Fiona Blackwell, the village's young herbalist who had inherited her grandmother's cottage and healing wisdom 3 years prior. Unlike her grandmother, who had been somewhat reclusive, Fiona had a way of drawing people to her. Her small garden cottage, nestled between the village proper and the eastern meadows, became a place where villagers gathered not just for remedies but for her gentle counsel and warm smile. "Another headache, Mr. Penbrook?" Fiona asked as the elderly fisherman ducked through her doorway early one autumn morning, 2 weeks before the festival. The cottage smelled of dried lavender and rosemary, bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. "How'd you know, lass? I haven't even spoken yet." He chuckled, removing his weathered cap. Fiona smiled as she reached for a small jar on her shelf. "The way you squint against the morning light. The tension in your shoulders." She handed him a small sachet. "Willow bark and feverfew. Steep it longer this time." Mr. Penbrook accepted the remedy with calloused hands. "You're a blessing to this village, Fiona. Your grandmother would be proud." He paused, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "Speaking of blessings, word is that Merchant Gregory's son has been asking about you in town." Fiona's hand stilled momentarily as she tied another bundle of lavender. "Has he now? Indeed. And with the Harvest Festival approaching?" The old man let the implication hang in the air. The Harvest Festival wasn't just a celebration of autumn's bounty. By tradition, it was also when young men of the village, and occasionally neighboring towns, would declare their intentions toward the unmarried women. Some families viewed it as an archaic custom, but many embraced it as a charming ritual that had matched happy couples for generations. Fiona had never given the tradition much thought. At 24, she had been too busy learning her grandmother's craft and establishing herself as the village herbalist to consider suitors. She found fulfillment in her garden and her healing work. "Well, Mr. Penbrook," she said lightly, "I imagine Gregory's son would find little interest in my humble cottage and herbal remedies once the novelty wears off." The fisherman shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, lass. Half the young men in the village would court you if they dared. You've the kind of beauty that doesn't fade with the seasons, the kind that comes from within." After Mr. Penbrook left, Fiona walked through her garden, collecting the last of the summer herbs before the autumn chill claimed them. The morning dew still clung to the leaves, and the distant sound of waves breaking against the cliffs provided a soothing rhythm to her thoughts. She wasn't opposed to love or marriage. She had witnessed enough genuine partnerships in the village to know that true companionship could be a beautiful thing. Her own parents, before the fever took them when she was 16, had shared a bond that made their modest home feel like the wealthiest place in the world. But Fiona had also seen marriages of convenience or status that hollowed out over time, leaving shells of people going through the motions of togetherness without its substance. The village seamstress, Mrs. Harrow, often spoke of her wealthy husband with a vacant smile that never reached her eyes. As the sun climbed higher, Fiona spotted her friend Eleanor hurrying up the garden path. Her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Fiona, have you heard? Nathaniel Gregory is returning from his travels for the festival, and his father has commissioned the finest silks from the capital." Eleanor clasped her hands together. "They say he intends to make quite the impression this year." Fiona smiled at her friend's enthusiasm. "And why are you telling me this with such delight?" Eleanor's eyes widened. "Because, my dear oblivious friend, it's you he's coming to see. His father has been telling everyone who'll listen about his son's interest in the lovely herbalist with the healing hands." A flutter of uncertainty passed through Fiona. She hardly knew Nathaniel, having met him only twice during his brief visits home. He was handsome, certainly, and his family's merchant wealth would ensure a comfortable life. But those brief encounters had left her with the impression of a man more concerned with appearances than substance. "Well," Fiona said, turning back to her herbs, "the festival is still 2 weeks away, and I have patients who need these remedies far more than I need to worry about suitors." But as the days passed and whispers of Nathaniel's impending return grew throughout the village, Fiona found it increasingly difficult to maintain her indifference. not because she was eager for his attention, but because she sensed that the peaceful simplicity of her life was about to be disrupted in ways she couldn't yet foresee. Golden Promises. The Harvest Festival transformed Merepoint's village square into a vibrant spectacle. Merchant stalls lined the cobblestone streets, each adorned with autumn colors, deep oranges, rich burgundies, and warm golds. Children raced between vendors, their laughter mingling with the melodies of traveling musicians who played beside the ancient oak tree at the center of the square. Fiona had spent the morning helping to arrange the medicinal herb display, a tradition her grandmother had started decades ago. She wore her best dress, a simple blue garment with delicate embroidery at the sleeves that Eleanor had helped her finish just days before. "He's here," Eleanor whispered, nudging Fiona's side as they arranged dried chamomile into small bundles. Fiona looked up to see a commotion at the village entrance. A procession of 4 polished carriages rolled into Merepoint, the lead carriage bearing the Gregory family crest, a ship with golden sails. The entire square seemed to pause, conversations hushing as villagers turned to watch. "Subtle as a summer storm," Fiona murmured, though she couldn't deny the impressive sight. The first carriage halted and a footman rushed to open its door. Merchant Gregory emerged, his substantial frame adorned in finery that outshone even the festival decorations. Behind him came Nathaniel, tall and striking with features chiseled to perfection. His dark hair was swept back fashionably, and his attire, deep burgundy with gold trim, had clearly been tailored in the capital city. "My friends." Merchant Gregory's voice boomed across the square. "What a joy to return to our beloved Merepoint for this glorious celebration." The crowd responded with welcoming calls and applause, most gathering closer to the carriages. Fiona remained at her stall, suddenly very interested in the precise arrangement of her herbs. "Miss Blackwell," Eleanor hissed, "you cannot hide behind chamomile forever. He's looking this way." Indeed, Nathaniel's gaze had found her across the square. He smiled, a practiced, confident curve of his lips, and whispered something to his father. The merchant nodded enthusiastically, and together, they began making their way through the crowd directly toward her stall. Fiona straightened her shoulders and reminded herself that she was the granddaughter of Merepoint's most respected healer. She had nothing to feel intimidated about. "Miss Blackwell," Nathaniel said, arriving at her stall with a graceful bow, "your beauty puts even these festival decorations to shame." Up close, he was even more handsome than Fiona remembered, and clearly aware of it. His eyes, a striking hazel, held the assurance of someone unaccustomed to rejection. "Mr. Gregory," she replied with a polite nod, "welcome back to Merepoint. I hope your travels were pleasant. Please call me Nathaniel." His smile broadened. "And yes, my travels were productive, though I found myself eager to return." The implication in his tone was unmistakable. Nathaniel has been absolutely fixated on returning for the festival this year. Merchant Gregory interjected, his jovial voice carrying to nearby stalls. "Wouldn't stop talking about the charming herbalist who tends to our village with such care." Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks as several villagers turned to observe the exchange. "I merely continue my grandmother's work," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The village was fortunate to have her wisdom for so many years, and now we're fortunate to have yours," Nathaniel said, along with a far more enchanting visage to accompany the remedies. Before Fiona could respond, a bell rang out across the square, signaling the official opening of the festival. The village elder, Mr. Thorne, stood on a wooden platform near the oak tree, raising his hands for silence. "Friends and neighbors, we gather once more to celebrate the bounty of our lands and seas. Let the harvest festival begin." Cheers erupted throughout the square. Musicians struck up a lively tune and dancers moved to the center clearing. "Miss Blackwell," Nathaniel said as the festivities commenced, "I would be honored if you would set aside some time this evening for a more private conversation. I have matters of great importance to discuss with you." Fiona knew precisely what matters he referred to. The festival's courtship tradition typically culminated on the final evening, but it wasn't uncommon for interested suitors to make their intentions known earlier. "I'll be attending the communal feast at sunset," she replied diplomatically. "Perfect. Until then." He bowed again and rejoined his father, who was already deep in conversation with the village's wealthier merchants. "Well, Eleanor breathed as soon as they were out of earshot. He certainly hasn't been subtle about his intentions. No, Fiona agreed. Subtlety doesn't appear to be a Gregory family trait. Throughout the day, Fiona found it impossible to move through the festival without noticing the increased attention directed her way. Villagers who normally greeted her with casual familiarity now watched her with curious speculation. Even Mrs. Harrow, who rarely left her husband's side during public gatherings, found a moment to whisper to Fiona that Nathaniel Gregory would make an advantageous match for any sensible young woman. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, village helpers arranged long tables in the square for the communal feast. Fiona helped distribute her herb-infused honey, a contribution her family had traditionally provided for the festival bread. She was just finishing when a hush fell over the crowd once more. Turning, she saw the reason for the sudden quiet. Servants from the Gregory household were arranging an elaborate display at the head of the main table. Silver platters laden with exotic fruits, crystallized confections, and wines from distant lands. And in the center of this extravagance stood Nathaniel, looking entirely pleased with himself. "Friends," he called out, his voice carrying effortlessly across the square, "my father and I wish to contribute something special to this year's celebration." Appreciative murmurs rippled through the gathering. Such luxury was rarely seen in Merepoint. When the feast began, Fiona found herself seated near the head of the table, directly across from Nathaniel, a placement that felt far from coincidental. Throughout the meal, he regaled those nearby with tales of his travels to exotic ports and prestigious trading houses. He spoke of the capital city's opera house, of diplomatic dinners with nobles, and of the expanding Gregory trading empire. "Of course," he said, his eyes finding Fiona's across the candle-lit table. "All these adventures have only reinforced my appreciation for the simple charms of home." He raised his wine glass slightly in her direction. As dessert was being served, including the special confections Nathaniel had brought, he stood and tapped his glass for attention. The square gradually quieted. "Esteemed friends and neighbors of Merepoint," he began, his voice resonant in the evening air. "I've traveled far and wide, seen wonders that many only read about in stories. But I've come to realize that some treasures are found not across distant seas, but right here before us." His gaze fixed on Fiona, who felt a growing unease at being the center of this spectacle. "Miss Fiona Blackwell," he continued, gesturing for her to stand. Reluctantly, she rose, acutely aware of every eye upon her. "Your grace, your skill, and your compassion have captivated me since I first returned to find the little girl I remembered transformed into such a remarkable woman." From behind him, servants appeared carrying velvet-lined trays. Gasps erupted from the villagers as the contents were revealed. Gleaming gold jewelry, ornate hairpins adorned with pearls, and at the center, a necklace bearing a ruby the size of a small strawberry. "These are but tokens of the life I offer," Nathaniel said, his confidence unwavering. "A life of comfort, of status, of adventure beyond the boundaries of this village. Your healing gifts should grace the finest homes in the land, not remain hidden in a cottage at the edge of the world." He stepped forward, taking a small box from one of the trays. "This is traditionally when I would ask for your hand, but as a modern man, I merely ask for the privilege of courting you properly, with the intention of marriage when you are ready." The box opened to reveal a gold ring set with emeralds that matched her eyes with unsettling precision. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. Elderly Mrs. Winters whispered audibly to her husband. She'd be a fool to refuse such a match. Fiona stood frozen, the weight of expectation pressing down upon her like a physical force. The gifts before her represented wealth beyond what most in Merepoint would see in a lifetime. Nathaniel's offer promised escape from the boundaries of her small existence. Travel, culture, influence. Yet as she looked at his confident smile, she couldn't help but notice that his eyes held more triumph than tenderness. He looked at her the way he looked at the exotic goods he'd brought, as an acquisition to display rather than a person to cherish. Before she could formulate a response, a commotion arose from the edge of the square. Heads turned toward the unexpected interruption, and in the brief reprieve, Fiona drew a steadying breath, uncertain of what her answer would be when attention inevitably returned to Nathaniel's grand gesture. Empty hands, full heart. The disruption at the edge of the square grew louder. Through the crowd, A solitary figure moved forward with purpose, parting the onlookers through sheer determination rather than any display of authority. Fiona recognized him immediately, though few others seemed to. Josiah Fletcher, who had left Mere Point 3 years ago after his family's fishing boat was lost in a terrible storm. He looked different now, broader through the shoulders, his skin weathered by sun and salt, his dark blonde hair longer and tied back with a simple cord. His clothes were plain but clean, a white shirt, dark trousers, and a blue woolen coat that had seen better days. "I apologize for the interruption," Josiah said as he reached the edge of the feast tables. His voice was deeper than Fiona remembered, with a quiet confidence that commanded attention despite its lack of volume. Nathaniel's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "The feast is open to all villagers, friend, but we are in the middle of something rather important." Josiah's eyes found Fiona's across the distance, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended the 3 years of absence. They had grown up together, had shared childhood adventures along the cliffs and in the meadows. Before the tragedy that took his family's boat and his father, they had been inseparable friends. "I can see that," Josiah replied, his gaze never leaving Fiona. "But I've traveled far to return today, and I believe I have something to contribute to this discussion." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Merchant Gregory stepped forward, peering at the newcomer. "Young Fletcher, is it not? We heard you'd found work on a trading vessel up north." "Yes, sir. I've been first mate on the Northern Star these past 2 years." "First mate," Mr. Pembroke exclaimed. "Your father would be proud, lad." Nathaniel cleared his throat. "While this reunion is touching, perhaps it could wait until after—" "I'm here for the Harvest Festival tradition," Josiah interrupted firmly, "the same one you're currently observing." He finally turned to Nathaniel. "I too wish to declare my intentions toward Miss Blackwell." The crowd erupted in hushed whispers. Fiona felt her heart skip a beat, memories flooding back. Of summers spent collecting shells along the shore, of Josiah teaching her to read the stars, of the quiet comfort they'd found in each other's company after her parents died. Nathaniel's confident demeanor faltered momentarily, before he composed himself with a practiced laugh. "I admire your courage, Fletcher, but surely you can see the disparity in our offerings." He gestured toward the gold and jewels still displayed on the velvet trays. Josiah stepped forward until he stood directly across from Fiona at the table. Unlike Nathaniel, he carried nothing, no jewelry, no exotic gifts, not even a single flower. "Miss Blackwell," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air, "I returned to Mere Point not as the boy who left, but as a man who has found his way in the world. I have no gold to offer you, no jewels to adorn you." He glanced briefly at Nathaniel's display. "What I have is far less impressive to look at." Eleanor, seated beside Fiona, whispered, "What is he doing?" Josiah continued, 3 years ago, after losing everything, I made a promise to myself. I would build something worthy of returning for. I've worked every day since then with a single purpose." His eyes held Fiona's with unwavering sincerity. "Everything I've built, everything I've become has been with you in mind." From his pocket he withdrew a small worn leather journal. "In here are the coordinates of every beautiful place I've seen these past 3 years. Coves with water so clear you can see straight to the bottom. Islands where flowers bloom that have no name in any language we know. Cliffs where the sunrise turns the whole world golden." He placed the journal on the table between them. "I marked each one, thinking of sharing them with you someday." The square had fallen completely silent. Even the most skeptical villagers seemed transfixed by the rawness of his declaration. "I've saved every coin I've earned," Josiah continued, "not for gold or jewels, but for something I believe holds more value." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, which he placed beside the journal. "The deed to my father's old shipyard at the north end of the harbor. I've purchased it back from the bank that claimed it after his death." Fiona's breath caught. The Fletcher shipyard had once been the pride of Josiah's family for generations before the tragedy. "It needs work," he admitted with a small smile. "Quite a lot of work, actually. But I have the skills now to restore it, to build vessels worthy of the Fletcher name again." His voice softened. "I don't offer a life of luxury or exotic adventures in faraway lands. What I offer is a partnership, a life we would build together day by day with our own hands." He straightened his shoulders. "I have no ring to symbolize my intentions, Instead, I offer you this promise. Everything I am and everything I will become is yours to share if you'll have me. Not as an ornament to be displayed, but as the heart of whatever we might build together. The contrast between the two suitors could not have been more stark. Nathaniel stood amidst his display of wealth, perfectly groomed and confident in the power of his offering. Josiah stood empty-handed save for a worn journal and a deed to a dilapidated shipyard, offering not what he had, but what they might create together. Fiona felt the weight of the moment, the expectation of the village, the opposing futures presented before her. She looked at Nathaniel's gifts gleaming in the torchlight. They represented security, comfort, a life free from the hardships her parents had faced in their final years. Then she looked at Josiah's journal, its leather cover softened by years of handling, filled with dreams he had saved for her. It offered no guarantees, only the promise of a journey they would navigate together. "Miss Blackwell," Nathaniel said, breaking the silence with an edge to his voice. "While this interruption has been unexpected, I believe the choice before you is clear. On one hand, a life of privilege and respect. On the other," he glanced dismissively at Josiah's offerings, "sentimentality and hard labor." Elder Thorne stepped forward. "As is tradition, Miss Blackwell has the right to consider these proposals until the festival's end tomorrow evening. No decision need be rushed." Fiona shook her head gently. "With respect, Elder Thorne, I don't need until tomorrow." She rose from her seat, feeling the eyes of every villager upon her. She walked around the table slowly, considering the two men who stood before her. First, she approached Nathaniel and his display of riches. "Mr. Gregory," she said, her voice clear in the hushed square. "Your offer is generous beyond measure. These gifts represent opportunities I never imagined possible in my life." Nathaniel's smile returned, confident and assured. Fiona then moved to stand before Josiah. "And you return after all this time, offering me nothing but uncertainty and hard work." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Harrow whispered loudly to her neighbor, "The girl would be mad to choose a broken-down shipyard over a merchant's fortune." Fiona looked between the two men once more, then reached out and gently closed the box containing Nathaniel's emerald ring. "Mr. Gregory, I thank you for your offer, but I must decline." Gasps echoed across the square. Nathaniel's expression hardened. "You cannot be serious." "I assure you I am," Fiona replied steadily. She turned to Josiah, whose face remained carefully composed as if he dared not hope. She picked up his journal and held it close. "This holds more value to me than all the gold in your carriages, Mr. Gregory." She faced Josiah fully now. "You left Merepoint with nothing and returned with the one thing I've always valued most. A heart that remembers, that builds, that plans not for display but for substance." Josiah's composure finally broke, his eyes shining in the torchlight. "Fiona, I accept your offer, Josiah Fletcher," she said, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. "Not because it's practical or sensible by anyone else's measure, but because when I look at this journal, I see a man who thinks of me not as an acquisition, but as a companion for the journey." The square erupted into a mixture of shocked whispers and a few scattered cheers. Eleanor had both hands clasped over her mouth in astonishment. Nathaniel's face had darkened with humiliation. "You're refusing the Gregory name? For this? Shipbuilder?" Nathaniel gestured dismissively at Josiah. "I'm choosing a man who builds things to last," Fiona replied quietly, "including relationships." Merchant Gregory placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Come, Nathaniel. The lady has made her choice." As they turned to leave, Nathaniel paused. "When winter comes and your roof leaks, when you're mending nets instead of wearing silks, remember what you've turned down tonight." Josiah stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "She won't have to remember because I'll remind her every day that she chose what money can't buy, a life built on honest foundation." After the Gregorys departed, the villagers slowly returned to their conversations, the feast continuing with a new energy, some disapproving of Fiona's choice, others defending it vigorously. But Fiona and Josiah stood apart from the debates, in a world of their own making. "I wasn't sure you'd even remember me," Josiah said softly. Fiona smiled, opening the journal to find page after page of carefully noted coordinates, small sketches of coastlines, pressed flowers from distant shores, all annotated with thoughts meant for her eyes. How could I forget the person who taught me that wealth isn't what you have but what you build? He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. The shipyard will take months, maybe years to restore fully. Good thing I'm patient, she replied. And good thing I know quite a bit about restoring things that others might consider beyond repair. As the evening celebration continued around them, they sat together at the edge of the feast, heads bent over his journal, planning not the life that had been handed to them, but the one they would create together, a future as yet unwritten, but already rich with possibility. The choice dawn broke over Mere Point with unusual commotion. News of Fiona's shocking decision had spread through the village like wildfire, transforming the second day of the harvest festival into a spectacle of whispers and speculation. Villagers gathered in small clusters around the square, some defending her choice as romantic and brave, others lamenting what they considered a catastrophic error in judgment. Fiona arrived at her herb stall early, determined to maintain her normal routine despite being the center of unprecedented attention. Eleanor joined her soon after, eyes wide with a mixture of concern and excitement. The entire village has talked of nothing else since last night, Eleanor reported, arranging dried chamomile bundles with nervous energy. Mrs. Harrow is telling anyone who'll listen that you've thrown away security for a shipbuilder's dreams. But Mr. Pembroke nearly got into a fist fight with old Simmons defending your choice. Fiona smiled faintly as she tied ribbons around jars of herbal salve. And what do you think, Eleanor? You've been remarkably quiet about the whole affair. Eleanor paused, considering her words carefully. I wasn't surprised. Not really. She looked up at her friend. All those times Nathaniel Gregory visited over the years. You never once looked at him the way you looked at Josiah last night, like you were seeing something no one else could see. Before Fiona could respond, a shadow fell across the stall. Merchant Gregory stood before them, his usual jovial expression replaced by one of careful neutrality. Behind him, his carriages were being loaded for departure, a day earlier than planned. Miss Blackwell, he said with a stiff nod. Might I have a word? Eleanor squeezed Fiona's hand and discreetly stepped away, giving them privacy while remaining within sight. Mr. Gregory, Fiona acknowledged, steeling herself. I hope you understand that my decision wasn't meant to cause offense. The merchant sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping slightly. My son is proud, Miss Blackwell. Too proud, perhaps. He left at first light for the capital, unable to face the village after, well, he gestured vaguely. Nathaniel has always obtained whatever he desired. This experience, while painful, may prove educational. Fiona was surprised by his measured response. You're not angry with me? Disappointed, certainly. The alliance would have benefited both our families. His eyes took on a shrewd quality, but I've been in trade long enough to recognize when someone values different currencies. He glanced toward the harbor where Josiah could be seen examining the old shipyard. The Fletcher boy always had potential even as a child. His father was a man of integrity. He is his father's son, Fiona said quietly. Merchant Gregory nodded. Perhaps so. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small parcel wrapped in cloth. I came to give you this. It belonged to your grandmother. Fiona accepted the bundle with confusion. Unwrapping it, she found a small brass mortar and pestle, etched with delicate herbal designs. She once treated my wife when no physician from the capital could help her, Gregory explained. Refused payment beyond what any villager would give. When I insisted, she said, kindness compounds with greater interest than gold. I never forgot that. He smiled wryly. Perhaps that's what my son failed to understand about you Blackwell women. With that, he bowed slightly and turned to leave. I wish you happiness, Miss Blackwell, whatever form it takes. As the Gregory carriages departed Mere Point, Fiona felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She carefully placed her grandmother's mortar and pestle among her herbs, a tangible connection to the woman whose values had shaped her own. Throughout the day, villagers approached her stall with varying reactions. Some, like Mrs. Harrow, barely concealed their disapproval. Such a shame to see youth wasted on impractical romanticism, she sniffed, examining a jar of healing salve without interest. My cousin's daughter married for love rather than position. 5 children later, she mends clothes by candlelight while her husband drinks away what little they have. Not all men are the same, Mrs. Harrow, Fiona replied gently, Just as not all wealthy marriages bring happiness. The woman's lips thinned at the implicit reference to her own situation. Security has its own comfort. Girl. Others were more encouraging. Mr. Pembroke brought her fresh fish for strength. In the face of wagging tongues, while his wife slipped her a recipe for seaberry preserves that sustained us through our early years when we had more love than coins. By mid-afternoon, Fiona needed respite from the constant attention. She asked Eleanor to watch her stall and slipped away toward the coastal path, seeking quiet among the cliffside wildflowers. To her surprise, she found Josiah already there, sitting on their childhood rock overlooking the harbor. He stood when he saw her, uncertainty flickering across his features. "I thought you'd be at the festival." "Too many opinions on matters that aren't their concern," Fiona said, joining him on the sun-warmed stone. Below, the remnants of the Fletcher shipyard stood in dilapidated contrast to the busy harbor. Weathered timbers, collapsed roof sections, years of neglect visible even from a distance. "Having second thoughts?" Josiah asked quietly, following her gaze to the shipyard. "No one would blame you. What I'm offering must seem like madness compared to the Gregory's wealth." Fiona turned to study his profile, the determined set of his jaw, the quiet strength in his posture, the gentle eyes that had always seen her clearly. "Do you know what I remember most about the day you left Mere Point?" He shook his head. "You came to my cottage before dawn. I was sorting my grandmother's herbs, preparing for her to teach me about fever remedies. You stood in the doorway with a small wooden box you'd carved yourself." She smiled at the memory. "Inside was a perfect little model of a ship, the one you said you'd build someday to take us both on adventures." Josiah's eyes widened. "You kept that?" "It's on my mantelpiece still. When I looked at it each day after you left, I never saw it as an abandoned promise. I saw it as a journey postponed." She took his weathered hand in hers. "I chose you yesterday not despite your empty hands, but because of what they've built and what they still might create." The tension in his shoulders eased. "The shipyard needs so much work. The main building is sound, but the roof," Fiona laughed, the sound carrying over the cliffs. "Are we to discuss repairs now?" "The village is still scandalized by my rejection of untold riches. Perhaps we should give them time to recover before announcing renovation plans." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made her heart lighten. "What would you rather discuss then, Miss Blackwell?" "I'd like to see your ship," she said. "The Northern Star. You're first mate now. Tell me about your journeys." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, they remained on their cliff-top perch, Josiah describing distant shores while Fiona shared stories of the village in his absence. Neither mentioned the gold and jewels she had declined, for they seemed increasingly insignificant compared to the wealth of understanding between them. When they finally returned to the festival for the closing ceremonies, they walked side by side through the village square, aware of but unmoved by the stares and whispers that followed them. Elder Thorne, officiating the traditional end-of-harvest blessing, acknowledged them with a knowing nod. "Our community thrives not on the abundance of our harvests alone," the elder proclaimed to the gathered villagers, "but on the wisdom of our choices, choices that plant seeds for futures we may not live to see, but that will sustain generations to come." As lanterns were lit around the square and music began for the final dance, Josiah turned to Fiona with hesitant formality. "May I have this dance, Miss Blackwell?" She took his outstretched hand without hesitation. "You may have all my dances, Mr. Fletcher." They moved to the center of the square where couples had begun to gather for the traditional harvest reel. Among them were newlyweds and elderly couples who had danced together for decades, all celebrating the cycle of planting and harvest, of endings and beginnings. As they joined the dance, Fiona was acutely aware of the contrast between this moment and the spectacle of the previous evening. There were no grand gestures now, no proclamations or displays of wealth, only the simple joy of two people whose paths had diverged and converged again, finding their rhythm together among the community that had shaped them both. "People are watching," Josiah murmured as they turned through the steps of the dance. "Let them," Fiona replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Perhaps they'll see what true wealth looks like." Later that evening, as the festival drew to a close and villagers began the work of dismantling stalls and collecting leftover offerings for the communal storehouse, Josiah walked Fiona back to her garden cottage. The path was illuminated by the harvest moon, casting silver light across the meadow flowers. At her door, he paused. "I start work on the shipyard tomorrow. It will be months before it's even functional, let alone profitable." "I know," she said simply. "The cottage roof needs patching before winter," he continued, glancing up at the visible wear on her thatch. "I noticed when I came to visit yesterday." Fiona smiled. "Are you offering your services, Mr. Fletcher?" "I'm offering everything I have," he replied earnestly. "It isn't much yet. It's enough." She reached up and touched his cheek gently. "More than enough." As he turned to leave, Fiona called after him, "Josiah? The ship model you gave me before you left. Does the offer of adventure still stand?" His smile in the moonlight was answer enough. "It was always meant for you, Fiona. I just needed to become worthy of the captain's position first." She watched him walk back toward the village, his figure gradually disappearing into the evening shadows. Inside her cottage, she lit a candle and placed it beside the small wooden ship model on her mantelpiece. In the flickering light, the tiny vessel seemed poised for voyage, ready to sail toward horizons as yet unseen. The whispers would continue, she knew. Some in the village would never understand her choice, but as she prepared her evening tea with herbs from her garden, Fiona felt a certainty that transcended explanation. The knowledge that true value isn't found in what glitters momentarily in torchlight, but in what endures when darkness falls and only substance remains. Seeds of joy. 5 years had transformed Merepoint in ways both subtle and profound. The same cliff still overlooked the harbor. The same tide still marked the rhythms of village life, but change had woven itself through the community with quiet persistence. The once derelict Fletcher shipyard now stood as the harbor's crown jewel, its restored buildings gleaming with fresh paint, its docks extending in well-crafted symmetry into the deeper waters. Where there had once been collapse and decay, skilled craftsmen now shaped wood into vessels renowned along the coastline for both beauty and resilience. The Fletcher name, nearly forgotten 5 years prior, had become synonymous with shipbuilding excellence once more. On a bright spring morning, Fiona Fletcher moved through her expanded herb garden behind the shipyard cottage, gathering fresh mint and lavender while her 3-year-old daughter, Rose, carefully placed stones in a pattern of her own design along the garden path. "Look, Mama." Rose held up a smooth pebble with flecks of quartz that caught the morning light. "It has stars inside." "Indeed it does," Fiona agreed, kneeling beside her daughter. "Just like people. Sometimes the most beautiful parts are hidden until the light hits just right." The cottage door opened, and Josiah emerged with a steaming mug in each hand. He had filled out over the years, his frame strong from daily work, his face weathered but glowing with contentment. The early morning light caught the simple gold band on his finger, not ostentatious but crafted with care by the village metalsmith as a symbol of their commitment. "Tea for the master herbalist," he announced, handing Fiona a mug. "Though I can't promise I've steeped it properly." "You never do," she teased, accepting the offering with a grateful smile. "Papa!" Rose abandoned her stones and ran to her father, who scooped her up with his free arm. "And how is my shipbuilding apprentice this morning?" he asked, settling her on his hip. "I'm making a garden boat," she declared with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster. "With rock anchors. Ingenious," Josiah nodded. "We may have to incorporate that design into our next vessel." Fiona watched them, her heart full. The years had not been without challenges. The first winter after their marriage had indeed brought a leaking roof during the worst storm in a decade. The initial months of shipyard restoration had stretched their meager savings to the breaking point. There had been nights of doubt, days of exhaustion, moments when the practical concerns that Mrs. Harrow had warned about loomed large in their reality. As Nathaniel and his father entered the cottage garden, they found not the modest dwelling they might have expected, but a home rich with the true currency of life. Children playing among herb beds, elders sharing wisdom by the fire pit, neighbors contributing dishes to a communal table set beneath flowering apple trees. Fiona, watching from the cottage doorway with Rose sleepy against her shoulder, saw the moment when understanding dawned in Nathaniel's eyes. The recognition that what she had chosen 5 years ago wasn't a lesser life, but a different kind of wealth altogether. Josiah joined her, placing an arm around her waist. "Having second thoughts?"
he asked softly, echoing the question he had posed on the cliffs years before. She leaned into his embrace.
Surveying the garden filled with the fruits of their shared labor. Not gold or jewels, but something far more enduring. A life built on love, sustained by purpose, and enriched by community. Not a single one, she replied, her voice firm with certainty. Some choices plant seeds that grow into forests. We have everything that matters. And as the evening stars appeared above Mere Point, the music and laughter from the Fletcher garden carried on the spring breeze. A testament to the truth that the richest lives are not those adorned with gold, but those built on foundations strong enough to weather any storm, growing more valuable with each passing season.